structured by history, which presents the possibilities from which he chooses. The present, within limits, is determined by the past and conditions the future, which grows from it. Without recognizing this organic connection between past, present, and future, time is literally out of joint, and the future is insecure or, in some cases, impossible. This is especially true of the African, whose history was suppressed in order to justify his enslavement. African history was suppressed beginning sometime around 500 BC, but becoming much more intense about 500 years ago when Africans were first enslaved. The International Herald Tribune of 17th November 1993 reported that the U.S. Congress formally apologized to Native Hawaiians for overthrowing their monarchy 100 years ago. When will the Congress apologize for enslaving Africans? When will Europe apologize for overthrowing hundreds of African kingdoms and enslaving hundreds of millions of Africans? If all the other English people of the world deserve redress, why not Africans? Why compensate slave masters instead of their victims when slavery was abolished? And I put that in quotation marks. Africans at home and in the diaspora have never been compensated for the crimes of slavery and colonization of the past 5 centuries, even though these surpass the suffering of all other English peoples and persist until today. The economic dislocation suffered by the continent is obvious from the scattered squatter camps of South Africa, the destitute masses of Angola and Mozambique, and the crack-infested ghettos of America and some European countries. The racism of Europe and America, which did not exist before Africans were enslaved, but was invented to justify enslavement, has not just persisted, but intensified. European enslavement and colonization of Africa represent the greatest transfer of resources from one people to another in human history. The scale of and the degree of exploitation of fellow human beings necessary to effect it gave rise to the myth of racial superiority as a means of justifying man's inhumanity to man. CLR James provides graphic testimony about slavery and slave trade. The slaves were collected in the interior, fastened one to the other in columns, loaded with heavy stones of 40 or 50 pounds in weight to prevent attempted escape, and then marched a long journey to the sea, sometimes hundreds of miles. The weak and sick dropping to die. At the slave ports, they were penned into trunks for the inspection of the virus. Because of constant resistance, the slaves were chained right hand to right leg, left hand to left leg, attached in rows to long iron bars. In this position, they lived for the voyage, coming up once a day for exercise. But when the crowd was rebellious or the weather bad, then they stayed below for weeks at a time. During the storm, the hatches were battened down, and they were hurled from one side to another by the heaving vessel, held in position by the chains on their bleeding flesh. A captain held up by the calms or adverse winds was known to have poisoned the slaves. Another killed some of the slaves to feed the others with their flesh. Upon arrival after the crossing, the cruelty continued, with slaves branded on both sides of the breast with hot iron to show ownership. James wrote of the irons on the hands and feet, blocks of wood, the slaves dragged behind them wherever they went, the thin plate mask to prevent them eating sugarcane, the iron collar. Whipping was interrupted in order to press a piece of hot wood on the buttocks of the victim. Salt, pepper, cinders, aloes, and hot batteries were poured on the bleeding wounds. Mutilations were common, limbs, ears, and sometimes private parts, to provide them of the pleasures which they could indulge in without expense. Their masters poured burning wax on their arms, hands, and shoulders,
comment, except on this issue. And I do think that the response that there has been to Bernie's comments is a measure of the unity and the extent to which this issue touches us in our hearts and souls and our minds. And that's why I'm keen to add my political organisational experience to say that yes, this is a good idea, and how do we, some of us who have fallen out with each other, who are not speaking to each other, who 10 years ago or 20 years ago argued over this point or that point, how do we unite around the common purpose of winning reparations for ourselves and for all Africans? This is not a small point, it's a very practical point. We can talk, sometimes are very good at it. We sit and talk and talk, but actually we don't agree anything and we don't achieve anything. I'm not saying all the time, because we achieve quite a lot, but when we come together, we have so far not found a means of working together. My paper tries to outline what I believe is the basis on which we can work together. It's saying we do not all have to agree on everything. It's quite an important point. We actually sometimes have come to blows over the smallest things, and the groups who are closest together have sometimes been the biggest enemies over a small point. At least it looks like that from the point of view of an outsider. And I'm saying I'm involved myself in that. I'm not commenting negatively about other people. I'm saying we have done this. But for this movement to be successful, I think that we have to learn, develop new ways of working together. But we have to have some agreed basis to do so. We can't just have pious wishes. Now, wouldn't it be good if we all worked together? Well, of course it would. But we do have to have some core agreements. And I try to identify those on page. I've said that this organisation is open only to people of African origin. I think it's an important point, and I say it because I know some very nice, very radical people who would say, but there are sympathetic Africans, and they should be involved in this. I say, no. I think that it's a view that has its merits, but I think it would also divide us if we were not to do it. I think that on this issue it must be defined, the content, the actions that we take to realise our ends must be defined only by people of African origin. So I make particular stress on that. I won't go through them all, but the other point I would want to stress to you is our need to be pluralist. We have many strands and traditions within this movement so far. And I want to say something very positive and complimentary to Bernie Grant. I have to say, in the past I have criticised him. I'm no automatic support of Bernie, but on this issue, Bernie, in my view, has been absolutely right. And the more I have become involved in the movement, which is only recently, the more I'm aware that yes, there are people who have been and continue to be active fighting for reparations. But it is my view that only someone of Bernie's stature and integrity could bring together such a diverse group. Because we actually, even those of us, the few of us who are here, come from many backgrounds, many political traditions. And I think that we should commend Bernie. It's not saying he has invented reparations. By no means. He gives credit to those who have been struggling, continue to struggle on reparations. But I do think that it's important for us to recognise that there is a means, and I think we're beginning to see it develop, of bringing us all together. Now, we've only just started, and I think, things are going to get heated. They sometimes are in the Bernie's office, where the steering group meets, and those of us who've been planning this conference, we've had some very heated and lively and necessary arguments and discussions. They're very healthy. And it's going to be like that between us. And I do believe, and I know, that we as African people have the capacity to have pretty heated arguments with each other and not fall out. And I think we've got to bear that in mind for the coming period. What I'm hoping, in my final few minutes, is that what I had in mind in my contributions to the planning of this conference was that we would have papers that would be starting points for further discussion within the wider community. We must take back from this conference the ideas that are contained in here. Whether we agree with them or not, we can write our own papers, we can develop our own ideas. We don't have to be led by the views that are in these papers. But what we do need to do is get the message out to every person of African origin. I believe that we cannot afford to leave people by the wayside. We have to bring them into the African family. We have to prioritise, so we can't do everything at once. The number of us who are prepared to do this work is limited. And I have to say that people like Frank Bruno, I would tend to leave him till last. But I wouldn't exclude him. But you see, I'm trying to make the point that it's everyone. It's got to be everyone. I want it to be with the whole of our African community, however critical we might have been of things they have said and done in the past. We have to win them in, bring them in, to build a massive movement so that our voice will be heard. Because I believe, and I think there are many other brothers and sisters here who believe, that it's not just a case of eminent persons. It might be important. Eminent persons speaking to other eminent persons and saying diplomatic language about, we want reparations. I believe that this movement will succeed when the mass of us are organised and mobilised. When our voice is heard. That will add weight to those who represent us. And I do believe, finally I want to say, that it is vital for this movement to build a firm constitution, to have rules that are understood and followed by all of us. We have to develop that constitution. It doesn't exist. We have to develop it. For next year, when we have a mass conference, I believe, will have, from this movement, from this conference today, we'll be taking these ideas back, building local groups who are affiliated to ARM, the Africa Reparations Movement UK, in a formal, organised way, in an accountable way. We don't want mavericks going up and speaking on behalf of the movement when they're not accountable to the movement. So we must have a formal constitution. That is my view. That is my experience, that we will achieve more if we are formal, organised and disciplined. So there's a lot of work to be done between now and next year. Defining a constitution that will provide us with the tools to work together. Building within our communities. Building local groups. I could see, and I know Birmingham has a very large community. It could have 2, 3, 4, 5 reparations groups. London should have 20, 30, 40. Likewise, in every town and city where there is an African community, there should be groups, organised, affiliated, networking, connected, communicating. There are many tasks. Each group will determine what its priorities are. We don't need to duplicate. Those people are interested in research and the academic approach will be doing that. They need to make sure they're not doing the same subject, that we are covering the range. There's a whole range of things that we have to do. And I've only got now seconds to speak. And I've included some of those things in my paper. I hope that in the workshops that you attend later this afternoon, you will be looking to the practical things that you will be taking from this conference to take back to the communities so that this movement is more than just a good idea, but it becomes a reality. Thank you.
Economic vision is another to be able to achieve. We've got to work hard to make sure that we can achieve the vision, which was being part of Patrick's introduction as well. We're trying to deal with this sort of Western intrusion on our continent. It's a sort of, wherever we do, we get this sort of instruction to we've tried to deal with it, and we won't let it get us down and move on. Bernie Grant is going to be the next speaker. Bernie, although he's given me a note about things he's understand. I have to say I first met Ben in 1978 when I worked in the Arrogate as a member. And I found him then as a member very active and very supportive of me as a race advisor. And I think because of that, we raised a whole profile of what could be done in those sort of roles with the sort of race policies councils had, although we didn't see it as the be-all and end-all of stopping the problems for African people in that borough or anywhere else. I know Ben has been consistently active and has done a tremendous amount of work on behalf of and for African people and used his position where he could for their benefit. He's now distracted himself on his own paper as Guy was born as the MP for Tottenham, and he came to England in 1963, so he's been here just over 30 years. And I don't know whether we should celebrate that or we should say it's not worth celebrating. He's travelled widely in Africa and the Caribbean. I know he's in the last month or so been both to Africa and the Caribbean. And he was, of course, present at the conference in Nigeria earlier this year on reparations. And it's from that he brought back his reports that have helped to stir people up. So it was a great pleasure and a great honour for me to introduce Lenny Brown, honourable member for Tottenham.
At least they could play Bob Marley rather than somebody else. This is a historic occasion, and I want to say to you that we are all making history. One of the things about history that people whilst making history don't actually know or record that they are making history, but we hope that people here will have a sense of that by the end of the conference. And I also say that we wanted a conference about this size, about 100 to 150 people, because we wanted to have a working conference, as Linda has said. We wanted a working conference because we want a big conference next year where we can have a rally and so on, and we can have people explaining. I want to thank a number of people who have made this conference possible. I'd like to thank Linda Bellos and Colin Alexis, who worked very hard on the conference. Graham Gibson in my office, Jackie Charles, who spoke earlier, and a whole number of other people who have come in from time to time. But I think that those people have been the core of the conference. And I want to say that the conference has started off in a way that I certainly don't hope that we will continue. We were supposed to have 6 panel speakers here this morning to present the papers. And in fact, we've only got 3. And 3 people haven't managed to make it. Oh, so you're here. Well, you should be up here. If you are in the audience. If there are any panel speakers in the audience who came late, would they come up to the platform?
No, you can't live very good.
You didn't come late, but coffee did. I thought it was a joint paper. Thank you, Julie, for being here. Do you want to present your paper now? No, you have to put the roundup. See, this is what I was going to say to the conference. No. We're not having that. Because the idea was that we would have the people who are presenting the papers speak for 10 minutes. Then I would sort of round up the conference and give the political context of the different individual speakers. So that it would be out of place for me to speak in the middle, if that were the case. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to have to start again. So you don't have to introduce me. We'll give Julie a minute to sort herself out. I'm sorry, I apologize. Julia's been around from the start, but there are other speakers who are missing. And I hope that they will turn fairly shortly so that we can begin to.
Come on, I need to know why we're waiting for Julie to be back. Can I make a practical announcement about a technical announcement? Request. Oh, sorry, forgive me, Madam Chairperson.
Yeah, I just don't want to spend too much time now because we are conscious. Can I ask, has anybody tried to do anything about that meeting? Welcome, Julie. I did see
black people will no more find themselves, in the position of oppression that they do today. And that when we do talk about reparations, we're talking about a fundamental overthrow of the system and the structures that continue to keep us enslaved. And I would also like to say that when we also talk about reparations, we're not only concentrating on the past, because people could say, well, you're wallowing in the past, what about the present, why haven't you been able to get out of the stage in which you are today? Our claim of reparations will be lodged within the perspective that says we will even start from the present, we will even start from the position where black people all over the world find themselves in the same positions of, of oppression, in the same positions of exploitation, and that it is as a consequence of the past that these same systems continue to oppress us. And so we are saying that that claim of reparations, which historically begins in the past, but that its relevance even in the continuous nature of this oppression, and that these are the things that we seek to change. And that reparations means self-repair, it means restitution, it means a fundamental restructuring of those structures, that have allowed us to be as we are today. My perspective of the reparations campaign, from a legal perspective, is this. I'll just digress a bit, share, I have a few more minutes. And talk about Rodney King, okay? The courts in America the first time gave a decision that the white policemen were not guilty, that they had not used unreasonable force. And then black people went to the streets. They took the fight from the courthouse to the streets. A lot of times, we could be under the illusions of these courthouses and justice and law, and that the law is supposed to apply to everybody. That is a fallacy. The experience of millions and millions of, black people in the past, in the United States Constitution, which stated that a black man, black people had no souls, and that it was legal for us to be used as slaves. And these other things should prove to us that the courts in themselves will definitely not guarantee us anything, but that the strength of our claim and our struggle lies within the community. And it is in that perspective that law becomes relevant, that the community becomes the determining factor of social and indeed legal change. So I would say that the reparations campaign would start from the community, from amongst the people, and that is where its strength would actually lie, in the black community, within black people themselves, and that it is the power of their struggle that will actually impact the legal system, legal opinion. And like I said, in America, after the black people spoke on the streets, they then took the case back into the courts and gave a judgment. That did not come because there were nice lawyers or from the goodness of their hearts, but from the voice of the people to say that we shall not accept this. I would just like to round up by talking about, other people who've gotten, other people, who have gotten, who have been paid back, like the Germans, paid back the Jews and the Americans, the Japanese. Those payments served the national interests of the countries that were making these payments. I think that is something I would expand on in the workshop. But you have to ask yourselves, whose national interest will
Caribbean. And what is happening in Dominica is this. The European community have decided to open up their markets to bananas from all over the world, basically. And what has happened is that countries like Dominica, St. Lucia, and all those other countries in the Eastern Caribbean, to some extent Jamaica and Suriname, those countries are now getting a price for their bananas because the dollar bananas have flooded the market, which will mean that the banana farmers there are going to be wiped out. No two ways about it. And when you look at Dominica, 80% of their foreign exchange comes from bananas. And I have a letter in my possession from the head of the Windward Island Bananas Association to the European Commissioner, which says that the banana industry in the Eastern Caribbean is on the verge of collapse. Right? On the verge of collapse. This is not word, I've been saying this for 5 years. But this is what now the bureaucrats are saying. And we've already had 2 bananas killed in St. Lucia as a result of this situation. And it will mean that the whole of the economies of those countries are going to be transformed overnight. So when we're talking about what we're doing, reparations, we want to put it right into the everyday context so people can understand what we're talking about. When we're talking about the world situation, the North American Free Trade Agreement between America, Mexico, and Canada has just been announced. And it will mean that the whole Caribbean-based initiative, where the Caribbean countries were able to sell manufactured goods to America at a cheaper rate without tariffs, that will fall by the wayside. It will mean that all those countries who've been selling shrimps and prawns and fish to America from the Caribbean have their industries cut back. We're talking about the context in the world where the GATT negotiations that are going on at the moment, the so-called Uruguay round, that they can't agree between the Europeans and the Americans because the French farmers say that they must have a subsidy on their crops. And the Americans say, no, you mustn't have that subsidy. And that round that is being discussed, and they'll come to a decision by the 15th of December, will mean that the third world countries, the countries in Africa, the countries in Asia, the countries in Latin America, all those countries are going to be squeezed out between these various trading blocs as a result of those GATT negotiations. We're talking about a context in Britain. The British government is destroying the welfare state right before our eyes, where the government is cutting back on unemployment benefits, cutting back on invalidity benefits. They say now you have to pass certain tests. I suppose you got to carry a 50-pound bag of potatoes for 100 yards. If you can't do that, they say, okay, right, you're an invalid. We're talking about that situation where all the pensions, everything is being cut back in a local context. And we hear from John Smith, issued a press release last week, yesterday or the day before, to say that they're not going to talk to the Tories in Parliament. We're going to withdraw peering arrangements. At a time when the welfare state is being totally dismantled before our very eyes. Whereas one of the Labour people said on television the other night, this country now is taxing everything in sight. They said if you are feeling a bit cold in the winter and you turn on your fire, you have to pay an extra 15% VAT on it. If you got fed up and you said, oh Christ, I'm going to leave this country, you jump on the plane, you have to pay a tax to leave the country. If you decide not to, okay, I'm not going to leave the country because 10 pounds is a lot of money. Instead, I'm not going to take a plane to Birmingham or Edinburgh, you pay 5 pounds instead. Every single thing you do is going to be taxed. And to be frank with you, the position is such that I believe that Britain is going to the dogs. Well, some people have already said it's gone to the dogs. That is a fact. And if that is the context in which we are to see what we're calling for in terms of reparations in the context of the domestic situation, in the context of the European situation, and in the context of the international global situation. And I want to say to you that when we sit down to discuss it, we have to be focused on what is actually happening today and what our role is in this country and in the world. And I want us to have our discussions and deliberations with that focus. So that it's a question I'm saying to you, that this is a question of our very existence that we're talking about as people of African origin in this country and in the world. It is as serious as that. And unless something is done about the situation, then we're going to have serious problems. Now, what are we going to do about it? Well, when we say that we want a reparations movement, we're not only talking about a legal case, and I accept what Julie has to say. We're not only talking about the historic case, I accept what Patrick had to say. We're not talking about an organizational issue, I accept what Linda Bellis has to say. But we are talking about the position that we have to create for ourselves. All those things that we talked about in the past. We talked, for instance, about economic activity amongst African people. Well, how are we going to do it? Have we got any money? No, we don't have any money. We're the poorest section in British society. Have we got any land? No, we have no land. Have we got any goods? No. We might have a few houses, but that's about all. And even our housing associations, like Harambe right here in Birmingham, with stock about £5 million worth of stock is being taken away from us ourselves and handed out to other people. So that where are we going to develop from? Where are we going to get the economic power base from? Well, I'll give you a few suggestions. There are people in Africa who've got all sorts of things, all sorts of wealth. They've got gold, they've got diamonds, they've got rubies, they've got radioactive things, uranium mines, cobalt, everything is there. We have people in the Caribbean who've got whole tourist places that people want to go to, beach and so on. Blue seas, green seas, sandy beaches, white sand, black sand, you name it, we have it. So what are we going to do about it? We can't get anything out of it if the welfare state is being run. So therefore, what do? Well, I'll tell you what we do. We go to those countries and say, right, we will be working on your behalf in Britain. We will be working on your behalf. We know you can't give us, we need to work together. We know that you can't give us foreign exchange because you don't have foreign exchange to give us. But what you can give us, for example, is a concession on a gold mine. What you can give us is a few hectares of the rainforest. The governments can do that. They can give us the concession on developing a beach in Dominica or in Trinidad or in Barbados. They can do that. We can set up an organization and they can give it to us. They can give us the concession. Now, we don't have the equipment to go and buy it. We can't build hotels for us here in Britain. But there are people here who can. And what we can do is say, okay, fair enough. If you want to mine in Zambia or in Zaire or wherever, if we have the concession, we'll sell this or lease the concession to you. And we'll lease it to British firms. We can lease it, we can lease the concession on all sorts of things. So that when I'm talking about reparations and when we're talking about having an economic base, I'm saying that we can't build a base from Britain. We can build a base from Britain, but we can't build it out of Britain because we have nothing in Britain. But we have a lot all around the world. If each African government were to give us a concession, you can see what difference that makes. Because it means that when Rio Tinto Zinc or anybody else wants to mine somewhere, they have to lease it off to us. And we can then use it are coming together, aren't they? Because what you were saying here, yes, see, what you were saying here is being repeated all over the place. And we will be working together in the future. Now, what we need to do is we need to link up with people like that. We need to link up with Julius Nyeri. We need to link up with current people. We already have links with Chief Abiola in Nigeria. So that the reparations movement that we're talking about isn't just a movement to get reparations for people, but that is a part of it. But it is a whole way of looking at ourselves and seeing how we can move forward. How we can move forward in our own benefit, and how we can move forward in terms of Africa. I mentioned these points because, you see, people think that everything is one-dimensional. You know, the papers come out and they take what I say out of context. And people then assume that, all right, this is what people are talking about. And that is not the issue. We've got all sorts of things to do. So we need to get on with it. We need to be in a position that we can follow up these claims. If we're going to be able to mount a massive legal campaign, we need funds, we need money. And we need to get it. We need to have new ways of getting that money. We need to work with our young people. We need for them to get experience. They can get experience in Africa, building things, in running things. And we need to make those links. We, as a group of people, need to begin to coalesce with people on the continent of Africa so that we can help each other. Now, I want to mention this specifically because when we go into the workshops this afternoon, we want people to take seriously because I don't know what you are doing, but I'm not knocking about anymore. I've had enough. I've had enough of playing the game. I've had enough. I've had enough of listening to crap from people who should know better. Black people as well as white people. I've had enough of it. I believe we've all had enough of it. And it is time that we began to take things seriously. So I don't want people who are faint-hearted. Right? We don't want people who can say, oh well, people who are supposed to be here at 10:30 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That nonsense has got to stop. We have got to build a disciplined movement. Because unless we are disciplined, we'll be sidetracked. I want to tell you that Philip Murphy, who's the councillor in Birmingham who got us these facilities, is one of the best councillors around. I want to thank him particularly for the efforts that he has made. I want to thank Sally Murray-Jones in my office, who I omitted to mention in my earlier address to you. And I want to mention Philip Murphy particularly, because something is happening in Birmingham that is going to reflect on us and what we're doing. Originally, we were going to have this hall, these facilities, video, free food and everything laid on the committee in Birmingham. And then something went wrong. And people decided, no, we better not support this because this is a controversial issue. And we had the chair of the race committee, Councillor Rashid, writing to the leader of Birmingham Council, saying that they shouldn't support this African reparations movement. They shouldn't support it because it is controversial and because Bernie Grant is associated with it. This person had the nerve, this Mr. Rashid, had the nerve to say that the reparations movement was gaining steam in a very respectable manner until I came along. What words that they gave? Well, I have news for him. I was the one who started it, in effect. But we have to begin to realize that people are beginning to see not only the potential of the movement, but people are beginning to see, well, hang on a minute, this movement could begin to change things a bit. And black people might begin to get a bit of pride in themselves. the others bring in order to sort of keep people down, to act as a layer in between themselves and black people over the period. We'll discuss all these matters, and we'll bring out the truth. Because, of course, the truth will expose not only the white people who have enslaved us and who have colonized us, but will also expose those people who had a hand in it, behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, and who did their part in all that. So our historic mission will do a whole number of things, including trying to make sure that the truth comes out about all this. I want to just end by saying that we have a job of work to do this afternoon in the workshop. We want full discussion. Whether you agree, don't agree, make sure you speak up and take part in that